months ago, Marvel dropped a brand new villain. His name is the Planter. He debuted in Ms. Marvel Mutant Menace 1. The Planter looks a little bit like the mascot for Green Giant Green Beans, but I think that might just be because of the leaves and green skin. The Planter is a mutant on Earth 616, and he takes on the qualities of any plant he's ever touched. He touches a rose, for example, he would grow thorns. The Planter decides to use his mutant abilities to rob jewelry stores across Jersey City. As he is leaving one store, he states that his robberies are a victimless crime because jewelry stores have insurance. Anyways, you know helicopter seeds? As the Planter is making his escape, he grows a huge helicopter seed on his back to fly out of there. It looks ridiculous, but it works. It's hinted that the Planter has the potential to join the good side, but the comic is still coming out, so we will have to wait and see. I didn't know I needed punk aesthetic lizard in my life until now. February's Spider-Punk Arms Race gave us the gift of Punk Lizard. Of all the characters I would have guessed to be into music and end up dressing like a rock star, Lizard wouldn't have even made the top 10, yet here we are. The Lizard of Earth 138 is in a band of reptiles. Their band is working to get a record deal, but it's tough. They are willing to do anything to get it though. Vulture preys on this and tells the Lizard band that if they could mess up the Spider band, they would get a record deal. The Lizards head off to do just that, only they end up getting kicked to the curb by our spider heroes. Lizard here wears a black leather jacket and he has spiky black hair on his head, and it kinda looks like a mohawk, which is absolutely iconic. You ever look at a villain and go, yeah, you named yourself appropriately? Well, that was me, looking at Terror. The newer version of him is from Earth 2099 that debuted a few months ago in Timeless Volume 3 and then in Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man 2099-4. The character of Terror has been around since 1988, but there's a new version in town and he looks awful. Also, his name might be Shrek, which I think is hilarious. Terror's thing is he was cursed to look like a demon with green skin and decaying limbs. Since his body is always decaying, he needs to replace his parts frequently, so he has the ability to merge other people's limbs into his own body like a self-made Frankenstein's monster. The version of him that debuted a few months ago is the scariest of the ones I've seen. He looks like he steals people's parts because he is falling apart. He actually has a whole operation for it in this world. He opened the Body Shop, and it's not a place for lotions or soap. It's a place where bad people get lured so Terror can keep their body pieces. Terror was ultimately driven away from his shop by Spider-Man to hide in the sewers. Maxwell Markham, aka Grizzly, originally debuted in 1974, but a new version of him dropped literally a few weeks ago, and he's kind of fabulous. The new version debuted in Spider-Man Unlimited Infinity Comic 37. The first half of the comic is Earth 616. It's normal Spider-Man fighting against the normal Grizzly, so we see what Grizzly normally looks like, a strong man in a grizzly bear suit. Most, if not all, depictions of Grizzly up until this point were a man in a bear suit or wearing a bear skin or fur in some way. The new Grizzly is a different kind of bear. He is still a strong guy, and I'm sure he still wears that grizzly bear suit every once in a while, but on Earth 71,490, he is not just a criminal, he is the criminal, New York's kingpin of crime. Not much is known about him considering he literally just dropped on like May 14th, but we can assume his story is similar to his 616 counterpart. He's shown in his human look with what I'm assuming are some adamantium or gold claws, which makes sense, but he also has presumably the same metal as a beard. I mean, he probably wears it because his like jaw was busted or something, but I like to think that he just chose to make himself a beard out of some of the most rare metals on Earth strictly for the aesthetic. You've heard of the Sinister Six, well get ready for the Sinister Six. They are the same but different and also scarier. Already, the idea of going up against 6 of your worst enemies at once sounds awful, but it can get worse. The Sinister Six exist on Earth 9349. This universe has a lot of cybernetic implants going on. They are super popular. The Spider-Man of this Earth has them, but unfortunately, so do the Sinister Six. That's why they are called the Sinister Six. So now you have all these villains that were already hard to subdue when they were normal, tricked out with cybernetic implants that make it even harder to take them down. In the comic, Spider-Man says he got his implants because he had some really bad injuries, but it's also implied that the villains were getting the implants first, which probably made it next to impossible for Spidey to win in a fight against them. Even though the villains are a bigger problem now than ever before, they also look cooler now than they ever did before. I know, I can't believe it either. On this upgraded villain squad, we have Electro the Living Circuit, Cyber Goblin, Silicon Man, who is Sandman, Mysterio but it's spelled Mystery Zero, Steel Vulture, and Dr. Octoplex. For the most part, everyone looks like just like a robot cosplay of themselves. The only outliers are Mysterio and Doc Ock. Mysterio is just his crystal ball head with some disturbing little tentacles, and pretty much the same goes for Doc Ock, half his torso and his head and all those tentacles. Spider-Man's cybernetic implants ended up being the only reason he made it out alive from the fight with all these guys. When he got the implants, he also received an operating system named Webby. Spider-Man is trapped by the villains and seconds away from death when suddenly all the villains' cybernetics stop working. Turns out Webby was able to hack them and shut them down, leaving an opening for Spider-Man to get away. So far, the Sinister Six have only appeared in March of 2024's Edge of Spider-Verse Volume 4, but hopefully we'll revisit them again soon. You've heard of millionaires, you've heard of billionaires, get ready for Killionaire, the teen influencer out to ruin your life. Killionaire's power is money, which is not a power to be underestimated. He hires Taskmaster to create a suit for himself with all the powers of all the Avengers. Unfortunately, Taskmaster was only able to build a little toy with the powers of all the Avengers. Still, that soldier was destructive. Killionaire took it on a walk downtown and filmed the toy destroying pretty much everything in its path, like billboards and screens and cars. Spider-Boy is the one to fight the little toy, eventually convincing it to be a good guy instead, and Killionaire is left with nothing but potential juvie sentence. Killionaire looks like a purple and gold version of Vector from Despicable Me. His haircut is definitely a choice and not one I would have made if I was a super rich kid. Also, the combo of the skinny glasses, turtleneck, gold slim jacket, and massive gold chain K, it's too much for me, I'm sorry, but it's giving Vector. Like father, like daughter, the Ringmaster's daughter has stepped into his shoes and put on his hat. The Ringmaster look was goofy on her dad, and I'm sorry, but it looks a little bit goofy on the Ringmistress too. Thankfully, that is probably the point considering it's the circus. The Ringmistress wanted to make herself into a respectable villain, so she put on her dad's hypnotism top hat and gathered up a team to create her own version of the Circus of Crime. Her colors are green and purple, like her dad, so green coat covered in black stars with matching boots, and then a purple jumpsuit and top hat. The top hat has one of those black and white swirls on it because it's used to hypnotize. This 2024 version of the Crime Circus had a major debut crime planned. They were going to attempt to rob everyone at a fair by making the Ferris wheel into a giant hypnosis device. Did it work? No, of course not. Doctor Strange put a stop to it. The other members of the new Circus of Crime were Jim Nasty, Stefano Stiletto, and Chief Beef. Who knew adding a 0 to the end of 616 would result in the most disturbing Marvel universe ever created? Earth 6160 is the Earth currently being featured in Ultimate X-Men Volume 2. It's the universe that the Maker used time travel to create his perfect world and prevent anybody from becoming a superhero. In this world, we are introduced to this shadow that is like terrorizing this little girl. The shadow's design might be simple, but it is unbelievably unsettling. I think the shadow is also like a real human man too, and he just looks like a guy in that sense. It's the abstract entity side of Shadow that gives me the creeps. It's like this black, scratchy line blob thing with veins and red misshapen eyes. I don't like it. I don't like it. The comics are still coming out. The character debuted in March of this year, so we have to wait and see where the Shadow ends up. Is Venom a hero? Is Venom a villain? It really depends, but Clown Venom did ruin a kid's birthday party, so I think we know what category that puts him in. Cloud Venom debuted in August of last year in Edge of Venomverse Unlimited Infinity Comic 8. The clown was a regular birthday entertainer that happened to be bonded to a symbiote. The kids at the party were being really annoying, and that caused the clown to get so frustrated he accidentally let his sim loose. This caused pretty much every child to run for their mom. Carnage eventually showed up to make everything worse and take out Clown Venom. Clown Venom used a variety of silly tactics to confuse and I guess fight Carnage, like turning his tentacles into balloon animals and making himself a piñata. Unfortunately, Carnage did win, and the clown's noggin ended up as a birthday present. The Venom clown is allegedly supposed to be a parody of Pennywise, and though it was pretty ridiculous, it was also pretty fun. We now have a new demigod villain who is drenched in the sweat of Theseus and has an enchanted bag that blows air. I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. Zip Zephyr debuted in February of this year in Miles Morales Spider-Man 17. Miles, Miss Marvel, and Shift were fighting this guy in Brooklyn, and I think he was just there to cause problems. Like, we get thrown into the middle of the fight pretty much, so it's unclear why Zip is causing all these problems. Zip is presumably from ancient Greece or is Greek because he says he bathed in the sweat of Theseus, which made him really slippery. Because he is slippery, he moves really fast because he's literally slipping through the wind, and also spiderwebs, they don't stick to him. The other thing Zip has going for him is his bag. It blows air, powerful bursts of air. I think Miles best summed up everyone's feelings about this when he said said, a bag of wind? What is even going on right now? Zip gets KO'd by Shift and presumably arrested. No amount of Theseus's sweat is going to help him slip out of that one.
Cavalier actually started out as a vigilante with a prowess in fencing. He was even shown to be better than Batman at fencing. In fact, Batman decided to let him remain operating as a vigilante after clashing with him, but Cavalier was pulled into a life of crime after falling in love with a woman who was responsible for taking a life. In the end, he was forced to surrender and choose to give up his life for the woman that he loved. Honestly, while kind of a weird villain, I feel like Cavalier doesn't get enough love. His character and story could have evolved into something really cool, it could have continued, but instead, the only other time that we see him, primarily, other than of course Legends of the Dark Knight and Blackest Night, where he comes back to life because Blackest Night, is in a Suicide Squad series during the Prime continuity, where he's basically used as cannon fodder for the purpose of their story. Because Suicide Squad. What villains do you feel don't get enough love in the comics? Let me know down in the comments. Just because you are considered a low-level thug, or in Fleet Delmar's case a supposed freedom fighter, doesn't mean you can't rise above your rank and become something much greater. That is just what Fleet did. He ended up getting his hands on some alien tech that allowed him to move up to the next level when it came to his rank as a threatening and powerful Batman villain. He was supposedly apprehended by Batman years before, who had tormented him with fear gas as punishment for his crimes. This experience apparently led to him losing his eyes and becoming blind, which is why he decided to seize the alien tech and use it to get revenge. The helmet he wore granted him psychic powers, allowing him to read the minds of his opponent and counteract their attacks easily in a fight. The helmet also allowed him to absorb energy blasts, which at one point allowed Karma to take on both Black Lightning and Batman at the same time. Hush has managed to pull off some of the most horrific schemes over the years and gotten under Batman's skin many times. In Catwoman's skin even. Quite literally, when he stole her actual beating heart. Thomas Elliot is not only a powerful villain because of his intense vendetta against the Wayne family and Batman, but because he also is often shown to have the skill and the strength to match Batman, as well as the cunning. He has taken Batman on in hand-to-hand combat and fared surprisingly well, and he's managed to set into motion outlandish plots like impersonating Bruce Wayne by giving himself plastic surgery to make himself look nearly identical, then capturing and threatening the real Bruce Wayne's life and threatening to disfigure him so that he could just permanently take his place. And yet still, Hush is one of Batman's lesser known villains, simply because he's really only had a few prominent moments in the comics. While Punchline might be new on the scene, she did go toe-to-toe with Harley Quinn, herself known for being a pretty deadly and unstoppable villain when she wants to be. Hello, Harley Quinn did take on the Holy Trinity all together at one point, and Punchline, when she faced Harley Quinn, she came out on top. Surprisingly. Punchline sliced Harley Quinn's throat and left her for dead in the sewers below Gotham during Joker War. But of course, Harley would recover because she is still Harley frickin' Quinn. Still, Punchline's victory was surprising for her being such a new and unseasoned character and baddie. So I think we learned then that she is a force to be reckoned with and is definitely a character to keep our eyes on. Punchline seems to enjoy fighting with stiletto daggers and dreaming up her own deadly brews of poison, even creating her own special brew of Joker venom during Joker War for Batman, which gave him his own pretty bad trip. Pretty much everything about Owlman from Earth 3's Crime Syndicate is surprising and intriguing. He is the evil counterpart to Batman, but is not Earth 3's version of Bruce, technically. Instead, he is Thomas Wayne Jr., who on his Earth was Bruce's elder brother. He himself plotted to kill his parents as he believed they were mismanaging the family's wealth, which of course would end up being his inheritance. In the end, Bruce refused to help Thomas and even attempted to convince him to not go through with his plot. So Thomas Jr., saddened, was ultimately forced to take his brother's life, having had much higher hopes for Bruce. Thomas would then become Owlman and use a combination of fear, wealth, and influence to take control of Gotham. Still missing his brother at this point, he decided to find someone else to fill that hole in his heart. After meeting Dick Grayson at the circus, Thomas orchestrated the death of Grayson's parents in secret and then offered him support in a home, manipulating him into becoming his sidekick, Talon. Honestly, I love Dr. Phosphorus and I think he does not get enough love. One, he's got such a cool and unique design, and two, I also kind of feel for him in regards to like like his origin story. Dr. Phosphorus was once a nuclear scientist, Dr. Alexander Sartorius, who just wanted to bring nuclear power to the people of Gotham. And yeah, I know back in the day we were all concerned about nuclear power, but it is one of the cleanest forms of energy, okay? So I don't think really he was doing anything too sinister here. However, he was resisted at almost every turn as the people of Gotham protested his efforts. Eventually though, he was able to build his plant, but he was simply forced to build further away from the city on the sea. The plant tragically did have a meltdown, which resulted in him being transformed into the monstrous looking Dr. Phosphorus. Sartorius, I believe, saw Gotham as the enemy since they had so vehemently opposed him, forcing him to relocate his plant. And so he decided to get revenge on the city, but of course he was stopped by Batman, and would be thereafter. Kite Man is often relegated to the C-list villains in the DC universe. He's often considered one of Batman's lamest villains, and yet via the Harley Quinn animated series, he saw kind of a revitalization of his character, with him even getting a solid fan base due to how he was depicted in the show. Kite Man, while an all-around good guy in the animated series, is still considered to be a villain in the animated universe and the comics, albeit still of course a C-list one. And yet in the animated show, I feel like what makes us love him so much is the fact that he's working hard to try and make a name for himself, and that's kind of a huge part why I think people love him in the show. That and the fact that he seems fairly comfortable with just who he is, even though he isn't necessarily, you know, a top tier villain and he knows it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try, and it doesn't mean that he is ashamed of who he is, or even his gimmick. Hell yeah, Kite Man. Brother Eye in Future's End is an entity that takes over the world. Brother Eye was initially created to be a hero protecting the world from any threat. In Future's End, the artificial intelligence was created by Batman and Mr. Terrific, but its prime directive ended up kind of, corrupting it. In DC's main continuity, Batman created the AI to keep an eye on the Justice League, who he had basically lost trust in at that point. Brother Eye came to realize that humanity's greatest threat was actually, well, humanity itself, and sought for complete control of the people of planet Earth, seeing this as the only way to protect humans from themselves. It's that age-old AI warning story. Be careful what you wish for. Creating AI technology may one day result in that tech rising up and realizing just how awful humans can really be, and either hold you prisoner for the rest of your life, or ultimately just kill you, because maybe the world would be better off that way. You know that age-old story. Peacekeeper 01 is a character who has made a few appearances in the comics, still being relatively new. He was introduced during Tynion IV's run and was one of the people recruited by the Magistrate in Gotham to keep peace in the city. He was in fact one of many Peacekeepers recruited, but most importantly, he was of course the first, 01. Peacekeeper 1 was also unique in the sense that he was recruited specifically to take Batman's place as Gotham's protector. Sean Mahoney was originally an aspiring police officer, coming from a long line of those who worked in the service. However, due to a troubled youth and some serious anger problems, I'd say, he was refused by the GCPD when he applied, instead ending up working at Arkham. Following the events of A-Day, he would be recruited by Simon Saint, who of course was working for the Magistrate, to act as the first candidate for the Peacekeeper program. Sean, as Peacekeeper 01, possesses cybernetic enhancements which make him strong, tough, and a formidable opponent whose tech allows him to learn and improve every time he fights someone. This was one whose reappearance even caught me by surprise during the Three Jokers story. While I am not sure if we know where that story falls in continuity yet, in continuity, outside of continuity, it was a still long-awaited read that I quite enjoyed, and which brought back a villainous sidekick of old that I did not know how much I really missed until I saw him return. Gaggy is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, and he is an old school sidekick of the Jokers from way back in the day before he was ever with Harley Quinn. In fact, at one point, Gaggy also returned to get revenge on Harley for taking his place at the Joker's side, but that happened, I believe, during Gotham City Sirens. In Three Jokers, however, Gaggy returns as one of the Three Jokers' sidekicks. However, his comeback is quite short-lived, as he ends up being devoured by a Joker shark. Rest in peace, Gaggy. What a tragic way to go.
Kicking it off with Queen Bee, or Hive Queen, either works. Queen Bee was one of the 20. She was abducted by Brainiac and mutated, made into a powerful telepath with an extreme devotion to Brainiac. She thought she was his daughter. He turned out to be horrible, shocking, I know. He retreated eventually and just left the 20 mutated devoted people to perish. Some did, but most made it out alive, including, of course, the it girl Queen Bee. She came to Earth to prepare for his return in quite an interesting and modern way. way, using the Holistic Integration for Viral Equality social media company as a front, she would kidnap people that had psychic powers and then harvest their powers, so when the time came, the entire Earth could be taken over mentally. Some notable Queen Bee battles were against the Teen Titans, Red Hood, and Wonder Woman. She fights using her telepathic abilities, but has many other tricks up her sleeve, including flight, which makes sense if she's a bee, energy projection, intelligence, telekinesis, and casting illusions. She is also capable of regeneration. There are a few different people who have taken on the name Queen Bee. This one is from Prime Earth. She first appeared in Superman Volume 3/21 and has had about 12 appearances total. I don't know why I'm including this villain here because his name is a mouthful, but he's funny and cool. So here's Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is the type of person to only target and take out a specific type of human. Onomatopoeia's chosen genre of human is non-powered heroes. He calls himself Onomatopoeia because he imitates every sound he hears. Something creaks, he will make a creaking sound. I like to imagine that Onomatopoeia has a human voice, and when he is making the sound, it isn't a perfect replica, it just sounds like a man doing a poor imitation of a creaking door. But probably his suit is tricked out and has some sort of cool feature that makes him parrot things well. Onomatopoeia wears all black, which is good. If he is going to announce himself using his voice whenever he hears a weird noise, the least he could do is be hard to see. Onomatopoeia has been arrested quite a few times and has faced off against the Teen Titans and Robin. In total, he has about 15 appearances. Crystal Frost went from one cool name to another when she became Killer Frost. Killer Frost was a villain to Firestorm. When she was Crystal, she was a university student who fell in love with her teacher. Her teacher did the right thing and refused her romantic advances, but that hurt her feelings a lot, and she held a grudge like she was born to do so. Post-college, Crystal was part of a scientific project in the Arctic that went super wrong. Crystal accidentally got trapped in a thermofrost chamber. Her time in there made her into a colder version of herself, a killer version of herself. She can now project powerful blasts of freezing cold and generate cold from her body. Unlucky for Firestorm, heat does little to hurt her, it actually makes her stronger. She has displayed the ability to freeze water droplets in the air. This might cause an opponent to freeze in place or trap someone with ice. She can create ice daggers and create such a cold environment and impede someone's ability to think. I don't think you will believe her weakness though. It's cold. If she gets too cold, she will go into a coma. She will basically hibernate. Remember how I said she'd held a grudge against that one prof that didn't like her back? Well, her first order of business once turning into a supervillain was to attack him. Luckily by that time, he was already part of the hero Firestorm. This Crystal Frost exists from 1950 to 2011 and she had about 19 appearances. I would join this villain squad purely because of their name and then regret it later. They are the Snake Gang. Each member is based on, you guessed it, a type of snake. So we have Cottonmouth, Copperhead, Asp, and Lady Viper. Lady Viper is kind of like the team's leader, but they take orders from Oracle. The Snake Gang, they fight Batgirl and the Birds of Prey. That is also the name of the comics, Batgirl and the Birds of Prey. The villains have snake-esque powers to go with their names. Cottonmouth elongates in battle and grows fangs, similar to the snake he's based on. His mouth goes white and presumably is filled with venom. Copperhead is very strong and tries to get his arms around his victims to constrict airflow. He also likely has a venomous bite. Asp is kind of like the guy in the chair for the group who is also in the field. He's the one that stays in contact with Oracle and calls for backup when the gang needs it. Lady Viper has the ability to change her legs into a snake tail. When she does so, she can see in the dark. When she is in this half-snake state, she hates bright light. She has claws, fangs, and an attitude. Copperhead has appeared the most out of the four with 31 appearances. Asp and Lady Viper are tied with 5, and Cottonmouth died in issue 3 of the comics, so he only had 2. Askana is an alien shapeshifter that primarily faces off against Hawkman. She debuted in Hawkman 2. She was an agent for Dr. Hogarth Kane. The form she usually appears in is like a human woman. For her big fight with Hawkman above the streets of New York though, she is stuck in this like green lizard looking form, but half her face is still human. In this form she is very strong, punching through walls. She also has sharp claws. She is a Hawkman villain, but a bit misunderstood. The reason she fought Hawkman in the sky was because she had to make sure he was a good fighter. He was. The reason she is on Earth is because she was wrongfully accused of committing crimes on her home planet and had no choice but to escape. Oksana has only appeared in the Savage Hawkman comics so far and has about 5 appearances to her name. Someone who is the same but different. We have Spinebender. He is actually a crime committer. He steals. He can get away with his crimes because he is also a shapeshifter. Spinebender has fought various members of the Bat family. He was first up against Batgirl when he stole a bunch of microchips. The chips were important because they had power that rivaled the chips powering the Batsuits from Q-Corps. He made it all the way to Miami before he was found out by Batgirl and Nightwing. He held a grudge against Nightwing for that and later went looking for him to try and eliminate him. In the scuffle between those two, Spinebender broke a street light that electrocuted him to the point where he should have died, but he didn't die. Spinebender is still out there and currently he has 3 appearances to his name. Animal Man's comics are weird enough, but issue 28 actually hurt my eyes to read. So the next 2 obscure villains are Front Page and Notional Man. Animal Man 28 is the first and last appearance for Front Page. He either was born with or grew into looking like the front page of a newspaper. He looks like if a mummy was wrapped in newspaper headlines instead of bandages. He holds his own in hand-to-hand combat and his weapon of choice appears to be a rolled up newspaper, but his main power is the news headlines on him. They mess with his opponents psychologically. Depending on who he is fighting, he is covered in disturbing headlines about that person. Usually it's covering their death. Seeing the disturbing headlines about himself activated Animal Man's animal instincts and he smacked Front Page with his own paper, and now the only headlines Front Page shows are about his own death. As for Notional Man, he made it to 2 appearances. He dressed in all white and is shown to have a heightened sense of smell, like he can smell feelings like guilt and grief and love. He carries around lots of surgical equipment that he uses to fight, his forceps being his favorite tool. Notional Man dresses in a very fashionable suit and I don't know why. His origin was that he was a phantom pregnancy. When someone wants a child so bad, they imagine they are pregnant when they really aren't. So he is essentially a phantom person. Animal Man also brutally takes him out and his body turns into sludge, I think. That's the end of it. Shazam and Cyborg had to work together to subdue Zookeeper and his Beast Force. Zookeeper is relatively new, debuting in 2016. He appears to have mechanical body parts and excellent fighting skills. He is the leader of a group of animal men. He calls them Beast Force. Some of the animals on his team are a pit bull, warthog, cheetah, bear, gorilla, crocodile, and tiger. He literally has a whole zoo of them. Any animal you've seen in a zoo, just assume they are on Beast Force. The animals all have armor and big guns, plus all the weapons their natural biology affords them, like claws and fangs or tusks. We don't see much of the battle with the animals, but we do get to see the final bit. Cyborg sends out a powerful blast, and Shazam is pictured perched on a pile of the Animal Men things at the end. Zookeeper is arrested, and currently this is his only appearance. Plastic Man's comics give us the gift of some of the most ridiculous villains, and I could not be more grateful. Today we are looking at Carrot Man. Carrot Man was in a live studio audience for the game show Let's Make a Steal. The audience for that show, usually they dress in fun costumes, so Carrot Man chose to wear a carrot costume that day. He started out as just a regular guy. The show's prize for the moment was a blender, and the person that won it was so excited she won that blender that she for some reason threw the blender into the audience. It smacked Carrot Man right in the head. It hit him so hard it awakened his inner evil, and that was that. He now had no choice but to commit a crime. Also, he passed out and no one cared. No one called an ambulance, so I don't really blame him for the inner darkness awakening. Carrot Man is new at being a criminal, so he announced on camera the crime he would commit and challenged Plastic Man to stop him. We know probably how the crime went. He went to jail. Carrot Man had a happy ending though. After escaping from jail, he hit his head again and went back to his old personality.
The story of Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, is actually quite interesting. The man who would become Mr. Negative was a member of the Snakeheads in China. He smuggled immigrants into the United States as a crew member of the Golden Mountain ship, but when the ship crashed onto the New York City shores, he stole the identity of one of the deceased immigrants named Martin Lee, but was unfortunately captured by the Maggia crime family and delivered to the chemist Simon Marshall, who was developing a new synthetic substance called D-Light, and was testing it on runaway teens and illegal immigrants. Thanks to D-Light and his unique biology, Martin Lee survived and developed both superpowers related to the Dark Force and the Light Force, and he became Mr. Negative, dedicating himself to becoming Chinatown's kingpin of crime. He can take control of other minds and empower others and objects with Dark Force energy. He has the strength to send Spider-Man flying through 2 whole buildings. He can tank blows from Spider-Man and Anti-Venom, and is fast enough to dodge bullets. Whisper Adair is a villain that I actually had never heard of before. She's been around since 2000, and as a street level villain, mainly to Batman, but to other heroes as well from time to time, she's actually quite unique. Originally having ties to the League of Shadows, Whisper was given a serum by Ra's al Ghul that not only made her immortal, but gave her the terrifying ability to turn into a literal snake lady that can spit acid. If that weren't enough though, she even gained minor mind control abilities, and the serum even gave her the power to create a small group of men who also have the ability to shapeshift into different animals. While she is tied to both the League of Shadows and Intergang, her loyalty is mainly to herself, and she has become infamous in the Gotham underworld. Steel Serpent is basically the nemesis of Iron Fist, and he is quite the capable chappie. Davos is the son of the Thunderer, aka Lai Kung, and growing up, there was a lot of pressure on him to become the next Iron Fist. Davos took his shot at trying to defeat the dragon Shao Lao in order to gain the power of the Iron Fist, but he ultimately lost and was defeated. The fight itself was not sanctioned, and for that, he was banished from Kunlun and swore to wrest the power of the Iron Fist from whoever would succeed in the task. That was Danny Rand. As the Steel Serpent, he actually managed to fulfill that goal when he beat Danny in combat and took the power of the Iron Fist for himself, that is, until his own defeat. Davos's powers were then restored by the Crane Mother in exchange for becoming the champion of the mystical land of Kun-Zi. Every time I have to talk about the Batman villain known as Cornelius Stirk, I get a whole lot of heebie-jeebies. Stirk suffers from delusions which make him believe that he requires the nutrients of a human heart in order to stay alive. But not just any heart. Specifically, Cornelius believes that the heart is the most nutritious when it is full of norepinephrine, a natural hormone that secretes when a person is terrified, as well as adrenaline. So he uses his unexplained psionic abilities to mentally make people perceive him as someone else, which, other than allowing him to break out of Arkham Asylum the first time, also allows him to get close to his victims and then completely terrify them in the most insane ways possible before he quickly ends their lives and partakes in a nice old hearty meal. Cornelius is incredibly effective, and he's been able to both evade Batman and even make the Dark Knight go unconscious. Carlos La Muerto, a crime lord in South America and parts of Europe, first ever appeared as the villain Black Tarantula in Amazing Spider-Man number 419, and not too long after that, he gave Spider-Man one of the most absolutely brutal beatdowns I have ever seen the wall crawler suffer. The title of Black Tarantula is a legacy title that is handed down generation to generation, with the heir to the title being taken from an early age to begin a life of intense training. Now, I personally couldn't find how Carlos gained superhuman abilities, but he certainly has them, and used them when he beat up Spider-Man. The Black Tarantula has superhuman agility and strength, able to optimally press over 30 tons. He can exert himself at peak for 24 hours, he's nearly bulletproof, his speed is faster than Spider-Man's, he has absurdly powerful eyesight, he has the ability to heal both himself and others from near fatal injuries, and if that all weren't enough, he even has optic blasts. He has acted in some heroic capacities from time to time, which the heroes need to thank their lucky stars for, because he can steamroll a heck of a lot of people. DC's Deathstroke is one of a few villains on this list that really toes the line of being a mere street level villain. With physical abilities 10 times that of a normal human being, and the ability to use 90% of his brain, Deathstroke is a guy that has proven himself more than enough times. He has fought multiple different members of the Justice League, and even when his natural abilities have not been enough, he has found numerous ways to power himself up enough to get the job done, even being able to fight on par with Superman. He has taken down the Atom, Impulse, Batman, Kid Flash, the Phantom Lady, Uncle Sam, and obviously the Teen Titans. During Identity Crisis, he nearly took down the entire Justice League, taking down each member with methods tailored to each of their strengths and weaknesses before they rallied. But even with all of that, being a mercenary first and foremost, Deathstroke started as and often finds himself working on a street level capacity more often than anything else. Okay, so if you know who the mutant known as Legion is, the one who has hundreds of different alternate personalities that all have different mutant powers, well, Mary Walker is sort of like that, only for Mary, she has only a handful of alternate personalities and they just allow her to access the powers that as just Mary, she can't access. Those powers include limited amounts of pyrokinesis, telekinesis to move small objects, grabbing her dropped weapons, or even turning objects into armor, and telepathy usually used to manipulate others, cause distractions, or influence people to do things without thinking, like grabbing their weapons. Her Mary persona is actually a pretty timid and quiet person, but her other main persona is Typhoid, who is more adventurous, lustful, and violent. She later adopted a few other personas like Bloody Mary, who was sadistic and brutal, and pretty much hated all men, and Zero, who was a cold, calculated, and militaristic person. Of all the characters on this list, I think Poison Ivy is by far not only the most powerful, but also the one who has the least amount of business being just a street level villain. Dr. Pamela Isley was a brilliant botanist who knew everything there is to know about plant life. She managed to work her way up to a position researching plants at Wayne Enterprises, but was fired after suggesting using plant-based chemicals to develop brainwashing substances. As she was being escorted out by security, she spilled chemicals all over herself from her newest assignment and gained a connection to the Green, an elemental force that connects all plant life. As a Batman villain, Ivy's goals aren't as simple as robbing banks and running gangs. She fights for the environment, using her connection over all plant life to really cause big problems, as her control over plant life can reach a global scale, and she's even put the Man of Steel under her control using her powerful toxins. Poison Ivy is basically a god in Batman street level villain clothing. Brock Rumlow was a gang member and criminal in New York City from a young age. As an adult, he honed his criminal talents under the tutelage of Taskmaster and became a mercenary and assassin, eventually gaining the attention and approval of the Red Skull. Rumlow's physical abilities have been enhanced to the peak of human ability, rivaling Captain America himself. He is highly skilled in combat, and he at one point also gained the ability to fire energy blasts capable of vaporizing multiple dudes from his head thanks to the Terrigen Mists, but this was only temporary. A lot of his feats have been against Captain America, who he physically matches, but he has physically manhandled quite a lot of people and has taken the lives of many others with his bare hands. He has tanked some incredibly heavy hits and is often underappreciated for just how much damage he can both take out and dish out. Basically, if Captain America can do it, there's a good chance that Crossbones can do it too, which makes him pretty darn capable. And lastly, maybe more powerful than you think is a bit of a lie for this point, because when it comes to the Batman villain Bane, he is widely known to be wildly powerful, especially as he is the one infamous for breaking the Bat. Other than breaking the Bat, Bane is largely known for his incredible levels of strength, which is even impressive before he uses his venom, being much stronger than Batman himself. After being pumped full of venom though, he gains a low superhuman level of strength, becoming capable of lifting up to 3 tons, as well as becoming superhumanly durable, fast, and even gaining a level of superhuman healing. But his strength is only one half of the equation, because what some people forget is that Bane also has a genius level intellect without ever actually going to school. He is a polymath, expert tactician, escapologist, multilingual, and even has a photographic memory. You couple all of that with his martial skill, and it's easy to see why Bane has become one of the Dark Knight's most feared adversaries.
Let's kick it off with a big bang, or something that may have predated the Big Bang, the Phoenix Force. There really isn't a question about how strong the Phoenix Force is. It is one of the most powerful beings in the universe, the Marvel universe at least. It has unlimited power, and it's not just a high level threat, it's been deemed an extinction level threat. No one really knows how it works, which I think works in its favor. If you don't know how the thing works, you don't know how to defeat it probably. The Phoenix Force has warped reality on a universal scale before, which is not an easy feat. The X-Men are definitely grateful the Force has taken a Jean Grey, because otherwise a fight against it would be near impossible to win. Not to say they haven't fought it, they have, they just usually are fighting the Force when it is attached to Jean, so she can help like from the inside. The Phoenix Force in its usual state is neither good nor bad. It's when it became the Dark Phoenix that panic set in. Dark Phoenix was a villain, evil, craved destruction, it wasn't cute. Sabretooth is a toothache, persistent, annoying, and has the potential to be a bigger problem than you think. Victor Creed has been around forever. Not really, he was born in the 19th century, but with all the problems he has caused, it feels longer. Mainly, Sabretooth is focused on hurting Wolverine, but he does not discriminate, he will attack anybody. Sabretooth is very similar to Wolverine, some argue even stronger. One classifies him as as a severe threat, I agree. He has an incredibly powerful healing factor and superhuman senses, claws are on each of his fingers and toes, and he has fangs. Pretty standard stuff when it comes to mutants, honestly, but he becomes way more threatening when you take his life experience into account. He spent a lot of time over his long life training, working with multiple organizations including Hydra, the CIA, and Weapon X. He learned to fight, to track and hunt, to shoot accurately, manipulate and gaslight like it's an Olympic sport, and just overall sharpen his intellect. He was adamantiumed twice, the first time by Apocalypse and then the second by Weapon X. In a surprising turn of events, Professor X and Magneto accidentally created a merged persona. His name is Onslaught, and he is the worst. Onslaught was created after Magneto ripped the adamantium off Wolverine's bones, and Professor X kind of lost it and made Magneto catatonic. Turns out when that happened, Professor X absorbed Magneto's emotions, and then those merged with the darkness inside Professor X that he'd kept hidden away, and boom, we have Onslaught. Onslaught stayed hidden away for a long time. It was when Professor X's astral body was brought to the physical plane by Nate Gray that he was freed. Onslaught took over Professor X and attempted to get the X-Men to try and work against humanity. The X-Men were like, absolutely not. Onslaught got upset and started absorbing mutants and other powerful beings. It took the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers to destroy Onslaught. It makes sense considering he had the powers of Magneto and Professor X in one body. Nathaniel Essex has gone by many names and clones, but no matter which version is out there, he is a nuisance. Originally, he was a low-level threat, just a human scientist, but then he was genetically modified by Apocalypse. That's when he became Mr. Sinister. He was really focused on machines and accurately predicted that they would someday take over the world, so to combat this, he had the genius idea to create his own AI that would be better than all the other AIs. What could go wrong? Nathaniel wanted to become a Dominion, and that is the highest level of interstellar intelligence. Dominions exist outside of space and time, and they're basically gods. They are so strong that very few things are considered threats to them, the Phoenix Force being one actually. On Nathaniel's journey to reach this status, he created 3 clones of himself and 1 clone of his wife. One continued with Mr. Sinister, one would become Dr. Stasis, his third would be Orbis Stellaris, and his wife's would be Mother Righteous. Each clone had a purpose to investigate so that the necessary info could be gathered to turn Nathaniel into a Dominion. Each of these clones caused problems for the X-Men at some point too. Eventually Nathaniel did reach his goal and took on the title Enigma. Enigma has been kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes for a long time since it exists outside of space and time. For the most part, Enigma doesn't bother the X-Men too much, it's his clones that cause the most trouble. The Nimrod, that is Nimrod, caused quite a stir at the 3rd Hellfire Gala, left such a lasting impression that I had to include it. Nimrod is a type of Sentinel, so there are multiple Nimrods out there. There was one in Days of Future Past, but this one right now is the one that attacked the Hellfire Gala. The head of Orchis, at the time of its creation, created this Nimrod from a place of grief after losing her husband. She placed her husband's consciousness into the robot's head, but then it got erased after an attack on the Orchis facility. Now this very powerful robot has no humanity in it, and it vows to put an end to mutants. So the robot is a bit messed up. The robot worked with an Omega Sentinel to trap and off Professor X. Then the robot worked with Orchis, the organization, which we will talk about in a second. That's when the Hellfire Gala was attacked. This was a brutal attack on mutants. Iceman, many new X-Men members, and Juggernaut did not make it out. This robot was created to protect humanity from mutants, but Nimrod went a little haywire and started wiping out humanity instead. But Nimrod came from somewhere, and that was Orchis. Orchis is an organization created to preserve humans, designed to prevent mutant ascendancy over humanity. It turns out mutants were appearing at an alarming rate to those people and were set to surpass the human population sooner rather than later. Orchis is extreme. They caused the biggest drop in population for mutants since M-Day, and that was the attack on the Hellfire Gala mentioned in the Nimrod point. When that attack took place, around the world and at the gala, about 250,000 mutants were taken out. That is a strong and organized organization if I've ever read one. To top it off, they also messed with Krakoa's main export that had the world accepting the island in the first place. The export was like the fauna of the island. It had healing properties and was used in lots of human medicines. Orchis messed with it it and made it so that any human that ingested the tampered export would pass away. This was revealed to the world with the message that for every mutant on Earth, a human would be harmed for it. So now the remaining mutants couldn't stay on Earth anymore or had to go into hiding. Thankfully, the remaining mutants were able to regroup and strike back, defeating the organization before all the life on Earth could be wiped out. Apocalypse has faced off against the X-Men, each time more harrowing than the last. He is pretty extreme in his thinking, believing very strongly in a survival of the fittest philosophy, which makes sense. He is the first of the second generation of mutant kind, so he is the fittest, and his life has just been one surviving horror after another. That doesn't excuse his behavior though. Apocalypse does have a job. He was employed by the Celestials to ensure evolution takes its natural course. With the job came some perks like getting enhanced with celestial tech, making his already powerful form even more of a threat, even godlike. He would go into periods of hibernation so he could rest and then technically live longer. When he woke up in the modern age, his first order of business was to cause a major conflict between mutants and humans. Nap time is over, it is go time now. One thing about Apocalypse is that he is always moving forward, always literally evolving into the best, most powerful version of himself. He can't stay dead, but he can be taken out of the picture for a while, but unfortunately, he will always come back. A quick list of some of the things Apocalypse is capable of: matter manipulation, self-atomic manipulation, telepathy, flight, telekinesis, and various celestial energy manipulation like teleportation, for example. If you thought Apocalypse was bad, wait till you meet his wife. Genesis is an Omega level mutant capable of beating Annihilation in god form in one-on-one combat. She mentally controls the plants in her general vicinity, that's her main deal, including the flora that might be inside you, kinda. Vegans better watch out. Genesis doesn't necessarily control the plant life in you to make you do whatever she wants, though I'm sure that's probably the next step for her. What she uses the flora for is to spy on you and even track you. She is one of the characters that spends a lot of time wearing the Annihilation helm. Her and her husband were the rulers of Akara, their children, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Genesis is very skilled in combat and the process of war because she is a millennia old and has been fighting a war for most of her life. The one between Amenth demons and the mutants of her world, and that the X-Men eventually did get involved into. I guess you could say she started out good, she was just fighting for her people after all, but when she defeated Annihilation and then had to take on his helm, she got corrupted, and that's when her true villain era started. That's when she started conquering places and starting new wars. She was only defeated when the golden helm was knocked from her head. So I've done all this yapping about Annihilation and his helm, but I have not yapped too much about him, so who is he? Annihilation is a dark god residing in the darker world known as Amenth. He rules demons. He is kind of like the Satan of his world. He is very old, he is so old, he has myths and legends about him. One such myth puts in perspective just how powerful this dark god is. It is said that Annihilation is the spirit of Amenth in physical form. Annihilation's energy lives in the golden helm of Annihilation. Those that wear it get possessed with his powerful spirit, and that's how he fought the X-Men. He did it through Genesis. Annihilation's influence is incredibly powerful. Apocalypse is one of the only known things that can hold him off, so this trio of Apocalypse, Genesis, Annihilation is kind of like rock, paper, scissors. Apocalypse beats Annihilation, Annihilation beats Genesis, and Genesis beats Apocalypse. Eventually, the Golden Helm was made into a staff. It had less of an influence over people that way. It wasn't destroyed until Storm came into contact with it, and then she destroyed it because it started whispering to her. I had to put Magneto in first place. I literally have no choice. Magneto might not be a cosmic creator of the universe or capable of destroying a universe with a flick of his wrist, but he has been causing problems for the X-Men for decades, pretty much since the start, and is one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful mutant on Earth, so he gets first place. I think my favorite Magneto thing that proves he is a danger to society is that the world literally has a protocol to deal with him. Magneto protocols. You know you've made it in the villain world when people prepare in advance to deal with you, even if you aren't planning anything yet. Magneto also has a very personal stake in the game when it comes to fighting the X-Men and mutants. Him and Professor X were literally best friends. Having to incapacitate your best friend is a really hard thing to do. Plus, when you go to the root of why Magneto does what he does, his message is one that some people can agree on. His actions are just a bit extreme. So people might agree with his message and then get radicalized later. Magneto, with all the horrible things he has done, it could have been worse. His ability to control magnetism is not just metal and magnets for anyone new here. He controls magnetic fields too, which has numerous evil possibilities. We learned how far Magneto was willing to go for his cause when Magneto protocols were activated and he couldn't return to Earth. The combo of that and the X-Men coming after him made Magneto stop holding back, and he ripped the adamantium off Wolverine's skeleton. To make matters worse, Magneto is actually competent and smart. Hate it when your enemy actually knows what they're doing. The day Magneto permanently joined the X-Men on Krakoa was a good day indeed.
There is no one that hates the Hulk more than Red Hulk. Red Hulk is the nemesis of the Hulk, which also means at times that he is at odds with the Avengers team, since the Hulk is often a mainstay member of the Avengers. Red Hulk is General Thaddeus Ross, a man who has had it out for the Hulk pretty much since day one. For a long time, there was nothing that General Ross wouldn't do to try to get to the Hulk and destroy him. His hatred came from a place of feeling that the Hulk was a dangerous menace, but even when Ross himself became a Hulk, turning into the Red Hulk, his hatred of the original Green Hulk did not subside. In fact, if anything, it only seemed to intensify because now Ross, like Banner, was really angry. And like Banner, you wouldn't like him when he's angry. Which Avengers villain do you think is the most powerful? That is a pretty good question. I feel like Red Hulk has to be up there if we do a list like that, you know? Red Hulk's pretty powerful. Loki is a villain who started out as the Avengers villain at the beginning of the Avengers run. We're talking about the original Avengers run back in the 1960s. Loki is the first villain that they face in issue number 1. Loki, of course, not only has beef with the Avengers, but specifically has a lot of beef with one of their members, his brother Thor, who is of course one of the mainstays on that first initial roster for the team. But in issue number 1, that doesn't mean that Loki just goes after Thor. In fact, he actually tries to destabilize the Avengers by making it appear as though the Hulk has gone off and gone rogue. Loki isn't just about messing with Thor, he's also about creating instability on this team, which is also something we see with the MCU depiction of the character. This is also something that makes him very skilled and very scary as an Avengers villain, because he doesn't just attack the Avengers head on. He's sometimes a threat that they can't quite see. He tries to undermine the whole team and do so in a way that they don't even notice at times that they're just being messed with. Daken is the son of Wolverine, who actually currently goes by his given name of Akihiro, currently in the comics. The name Daken was actually a cruel nickname that Akihiro initially just adopted as his own. Daken in Japanese translates to cur or mongrel in English, and was used in reference to the fact that Akihiro was of mixed race. His mother was of course a Japanese woman, Itsu, who was slain before she could give birth to Daken, and his father was Wolverine, who believed that their unborn child had also perished along with his wife, and didn't actually know that Daken had actually been stolen and did indeed survive following Itsu's death. Daken was raised to hate his father and would grow up to become a villain, and specifically an enemy of Wolverine. Norman would even recruit Daken to become his stand-in Wolverine for his Dark Avengers team. And if you're wondering how this made him a hater of the Avengers, not the X-Men, that would be because Wolverine was actually on the Avengers team. Yeah, Wolverine's actually been an Avenger. Though I'm sure Daken was also not a fan of the X-Men either in the early days, considering yes, his dad is known for also being a prominent member of that superhero mutant team that we all love as well. The Red Ghost was originally a Fantastic Four villain. He's a Russian communist who was known for his mad science. He studied and sought to recreate the mutating effects of the cosmic rays, which were responsible of course for giving the Fantastic Four their powers. Ivan Kragoff built a ceramic ship, sounds really heavy, and went up into space with a team of apes. He and his apes gained powers. Ivan himself gained the ability to appear intangible, hence his name as the Red Ghost, and became the leader of the Super Apes. Later on, he would team up with the Mole Man and end up fighting the Avengers while they attempted to rescue their kidnapped teammate, Giant Man, from Mole Man's clutches. He was also thwarted of course by the Avengers later on when he attempted to rob a bank with this team of Super Apes. He may have started as an FF villain, but you can bet he has many reasons to hate the Avengers team as well. The Wrecking Crew is a villainous entourage who appear as sort of blue-collar construction workers. In reality, they are Dirk Garthwaite, who was the original Wrecker, and his team comprised of Thunderball, aka Elliot Franklin, previously a physicist, Bulldozer, previously a military military sergeant known as Henry Camp, pile driver aka Brian Kaluski, who used to be a farmer. They received their powers when they all came into contact with a crowbar as it was struck by some magical lightning. Good old magical lightning giving people powers. They have attempted to take hold of the Avengers Mansion on more than one occasion, teaming up with the Masters of Evil during one of their attempts, and kidnapping Misty Knight and using her to control Iron Fist another time. They're usually handily defeated by the Avengers whenever they go up against the team, however. It seems that having magical construction equipment and mystical abilities is just not enough to defeat the Avengers. Ultron hates a lot of folks. Pretty much if you aren't a robot, Ultron is not a fan of you. Honestly, if you aren't Ultron, I feel like Ultron is sometimes just not a fan of you, but I digress. Some of Ultron's first words upon his creation spoke towards the hatred he felt for the Avengers. Not directly, but more indirectly in regard to the fact that many of them were human and all of them protected, of course, the human race. Shortly after being created by Hank Pym in the comics, Ultron had a realization, saying, "I know now that it is time to put your species out of its misery. You serve no value, you serve no purpose." Just like in the films, Ultron has had it out for humanity pretty much since his creation, which not only puts him at odds with the Avengers, but also means he despises most of the Avengers team too, as many of the members of that core team, while super, are also human. Not all, but I would say enough of them. Also add in the fact that his father Hank Pym is on the team, and Ultron has of course never been a fan of his dad. Moonstone is someone that I've actually wanted to see for a while in the MCU, but we haven't seen her yet. She's not the only Dark Avenger stand-in for Carol Danvers in her former mantle as Miss Marvel, but has also been a member of the Thunderbolts as well. Norman chose Karla Sofin to become his Miss Marvel after Carol refused to join Osborn's Dark Avengers team. Karla is also a major antagonist to Carol herself, having a history with the Marvel name prior to her time serving on the Dark Avengers. If anyone has beef with Carol and the Avengers, it's Karla. For her, the feud is also quite personal. You might only think of him as a Spider-Man villain, but Norman Osborn is a surprisingly powerful Avengers villain as well. And while he does often hate Peter, he also has been known to hate Spider-Man's colleagues, the Avengers, as well at times. He created his own entire team of Dark Avengers in his attempt to oppose and replace them. He even tried to recruit some of the Avengers members to this team, but of course, they refused. During his time as leader of the Hammer organization and of the Dark Avengers, Norman also gave himself a place on the team, replacing Iron Man as the Iron Patriot. Of course, he is much more sinister and obsessive than any version of Tony could ever be. Norman as Iron Patriot is not only a team member, but is also the one who ultimately decides who he wants on his team, recruiting other Avengers villains and turning them into alternate versions of their opposing heroes. Baron Zemo is one of my favorite villains when it comes to any and all that he opposes, but I think I especially love him as an Avengers villain. Zemo, while certainly dangerous on his own, is also well known for leading his own popular villain group, the Masters of Evil. Not only is this group formidable as rivals to the Avengers, but they also at one point attempted to defeat the Avengers by basically beating them at their own game. Yeah, this was when Baron Zemo came up with the plan to disguise the team and rebrand them as a hero group, attempting to beat the Avengers at their own thing that they do by just replacing the Avengers. Enter the Thunderbolts, the initial Thunderbolts team, that is. It wouldn't be revealed till after this team had made a name for themselves both in canon and in comics who they truly were, and honestly it was quite the impressive twist. The Triune Understanding was an organization led by Jonathan Tremont. It was originally believed to be an organization focused on maximizing human potential, although it was later revealed to have a more sinister motive. Tremont specifically used the organization and its resources to create a smear campaign to be used against the Avengers. He claimed the Avengers were intolerant of various religions and races. He also used his villainous brothers, Lord Templar and Pagan, in an attack against the Avengers, which he then used to blame the superhero team for in regards to all the destruction that the fight had caused. What's truly wild is although this organization is not one of the most well-known Avengers enemies, the Triune Understanding still succeeded in getting both Thor and Captain America to leave the team for a while. So not only do they really hate the Avengers, but they're also kind of successful in their villainous schemes.
DC has done it again, creating a truly unhinged character design in the form of Orphan 3 or Orphan the Third. Orphan is an orphan. Orphan is also a baby that lives suspended in an advanced robotic suit and thinks like an adult. Orphan's parents were studying the Source Wall. The Source Wall is the barrier that surrounds the multiverse. One day that barrier was breached, obliterating Orphan's parents. Orphan's mom was pregnant with him at the time, and he survived because of his family's techno-familiar, Darling. Darling assimilated Orphan's mom's body and created an artificial womb. Since Orphan and Darling were so close to the wall being breached, Orphan absorbed the power from what was on the other side of the wall, energy from the source. The source is the source of everything. Its power is limitless, and Orphan has that running through his veins. It gives him powers like teleportation and energy blasts. Darling and Orphan are tied to each other in some ways. When Darling was destroyed, Orphan went into a sort of like catatonic state. Deadringer can take on the form of any dead body he touches and can cause way more problems than you might think. Louis Dexter is a mutant. His mimicking abilities are not reserved for people, he can also mimic animals. He discovered his abilities by touching his deceased cat and father, and that is so traumatic. Dexter chose to use his powers for evil. He started to remove pieces of heroes from their graves, because when he touches a deceased super person, he gets their powers. Dexter is limited to one person at a time, and if he wants to revisit the body of someone, he has to touch them again, and that is hard when you take decaying into account. Seems like it could be a major inconvenience, so he decided to make his life easier. He was going to start carrying pieces of heroes in a cigar box with him. The pieces, gross. Deadringer's most famous battle was when he and his partner Super Patriot became Porcupine and Captain America to destroy Captain America's reputation. The two staged a fight at a charity gala and deliberately hurt the crowd. The pair were eventually arrested. Death Adder is one of the many villains Deathringer has impersonated, so spoiler, he was deceased at one point but was revived and then died again. Death Adder was Roland Burroughs. Roland received a surgery courtesy of Roxxon Oil Company. The surgery was supposed to give him claws, a bionic tail, and gills. The part of the surgery to give him the gills went wrong, and Roland lost the ability to speak, becoming mute. Roland, now a villain, received his costume and joined the Serpent Squad. Death Adder and the Serpents became mercs for hire. He was a pretty serious foe, as his tail could move up to 60 miles per hour and was adorned with a bunch of sharp poisonous prongs. So if the sheer force of getting smacked doesn't take you out, the poison sure will. His claws also had the poison in them, and Death Adder has had about 30 appearances total. Powerful sorcerer Duran once tried unleashing monsters in Mexico City, causing immense amounts of damage. Duran lives in Mexico, and he hated seeing the nature there getting destroyed. He was angry with developers and the large amounts of pollution caused by the tourism industry and just the way people treat his home. He became radicalized, and that is not something you want from a powerful sorcerer. Duran kidnapped a girl and used her as a vessel for the true power of the earth, as Duran puts it. So she caused a massive explosion downtown, and it got some local Mexican heroes involved and Superman. This all happened in Superman Annual Volume 2 Issue 12. It's also the only appearance Duran has had. The big final battle happens in downtown Mexico City, and it's a disaster. There is a huge firestorm unleashed, and it takes the powers of Superman and the three local heroes to get everything under control. It wasn't easy. Duran learned sorcery from Firewolf, and Firewolf was able to control Superman's mind, so now Duran is capable of that and also crushing the windpipes of Superman with only his mind, among other things, like being able to call upon the primal powers of Mother Earth. The American dragon Unkahilla was based on a real legend in Sioux mythology, and she's also a complete menace. She is a demon residing in the ground, and it destroys everything around her, especially the surface and anyone on it. She has bad vibes to the point where she can pollute the soil she just passes through, making it unusable. Unkahilla is somewhere between 30 to 50 feet long. She terrorizes the local indigenous communities, kidnapping people, swallowing people whole, destroying the food supply. Literally not the kind of pest you want in your garden. She can also create monster children that are like mini hers. She needed to be exterminated, and Wolverine was around and ready to help, so he went to take her down. Only she was a tough fight. It wasn't until her heart was separated from her body that she finally went down. Styx and Stone have very different origin stories, but they cause trouble together like they are brothers. Styx was originally homeless, and Stone was on a team of scientists doing experimental cancer research. The team of scientists were offering compensation for anyone willing to be experimented on, so Styx signed up. Stone had an interesting theory that he was unauthorized to test. Stone thought that someone could become immune to cancer the same way someone can become immune to snake bites. Of course, he did run the test on Styx, and of course it ended in the worst way. Styx became a walking cancer, decaying any organic material he comes in contact with. Awful outcome, but at least Stone's theory was right. Styx was immune to cancer himself. Stone felt really bad about this and vowed to find a cure for Styx. Somewhere along the way, we actually don't know how it happened, but Stone turned into a big stone monster, and with that he gained the ability to decay any inorganic matter. So Styx and Stone together are a team you do not want to go up against no matter who or what you are. Blood Shadow is a very cool villain that I would never want to meet, but I think they should bring back anyway. He was known for facing off against Wolverine and perishing at the claws of Wolverine. Blood Shadow was capable of telepathy. He was also intimately familiar with the human body and its deadly pressure points like the back of his hand. Blood Shadow was also a trained martial artist. He combined this trio of skills into an interesting fighting style. He would use telepathy to determine an opponent's next move, his martial arts training to counter it, and his knowledge of the human body to determine which deadly pressure points would be exposed and which ones he could hit in the moment. Unfortunately for Blood Shadow, his telepathy was a bit too powerful in a fight with Wolverine, and he accidentally unlocked Wolverine's base feral animalistic instincts. No one can survive those, not even Blood Shadow. Headhunter started out as nothing more than a con woman, but using her powers of persuasion, she became the most powerful woman on Wall Street. She is deranged, and I mean that with everything in me. Headhunter is obsessed with Namor, so obsessed she kidnaps him and puts him in her wall of heads. You know what hunters do with animal heads they take as trophies? She did that with the people that crossed her on her journey to the top of Wall Street. She also has the ability to mesmerize people and control them, so that also has helped her in her journey to the top of the financial world. The wall was eventually destroyed, and it turns out all the people were actually just catatonic, put to sleep by Headhunter's mesmerizing powers. Headhunter also has little knife fingers, and she wears a lot of suits. The powerful villainess known as Verna once tried to destroy all spider people. Y'all, I've been waiting for the chance to talk about Verna. Verna is from Earth-001. She comes from a family that has dedicated their lives to traveling across the multiverse, hunting down and exterminating all spider totems. The family goes by the Inheritors. Like a leech, they parasite powers from other people, feeding on their life forces. The Inheritors eventually locked in on the spider totems because they wanted to defeat the spider deity of Earth-001, so that means it has to be every other world's battle too. They went up against an army of spider people. The odds were never in their favor. Verna and her family were left on a super radioactive Earth, Earth-3145, and were trapped there forever as they are sensitive to radiation and have to stay put in a tower. Verna ultimately passed after escaping said tower while trying to get her father's soul that was trapped in a crystal. Verna's main power is the life force energy absorption thing. Once Verna touches a person, even if she doesn't drain your life force all the way and you live, she can still sense you from almost anywhere, which is super creepy. Verna is also technically immortal. She doesn't age, she doesn't get sick, but she can be exterminated. If someone were to split her in two, she's done for. So overall, a pretty sick woman in all senses of the word, but the reason I have been waiting to mention her, one of my favorite movies when I was a little girl was Barbie Fairytopia. The main villain in that movie was La Verna, and she looks exactly the same as Marvel's Verna. Look at the hair and look at the names, they are the same. I am not saying they copied Barbie, but there are clues. Deathstalker was once a wealthy man from a prestigious family, then he decided to become a criminal. He invented something called the T-Ray or Time Displacer Ray. When used, it transports its victims to an interdimensional void for a few hours. When used, the ray looked really scary because it would make people dissolve before your eyes. It wasn't until hours later that you would find out the person was actually fine. In a fight with Daredevil, his gun exploded and it sent him to the limbo-like realm permanently. He eventually figured out how to get back to Earth, but the catch was he could only be here for up to like 5 hours before he was pulled back to limbo. During the 5 hours, he appeared like he was a phantom, and he really used that to his advantage, stealing tech and creating cybernetic death grip devices to put in his gloves. Including his Dead Ringer appearance, Deathstalker has appeared about 24 times.
Senator Robert Kelly is a complex figure who started out as a politician that avidly opposed and even seemed to hate mutants. Really, Kelly was worried about mutants, and he feared what their growing mutant population might bring about. He's an interesting foe when it comes to his hatred of mutant kind, as he's actually kind of one of the more level-headed and even somewhat reasonable enemies of the X-Men when it comes to how he feels about mutants. Kelly mostly just wants what is best for humankind, which means that he can be reasoned with at times, and even has allied himself with mutants. While he's also certainly become involved in plots that are centered around mutant oppression and even in some cases mutant destruction, in In the end, he does come around after his life has been saved multiple times by mutants during attempted assassination plots. However, after realizing the error of his ways and reconsidering his stance on mutants, he was then unfortunately killed in one of those assassination attempts, which managed to actually succeed, even with Cable attempting to protect him. Which other villains do you think could or should be redeemed? Do you think any of the people that hate mutants can be redeemed? I mean, I feel like Kelly was, but I don't know. Although the creation and formation of unity we saw from mutant kind during the Dawn of X era caused programs who would use mutants as test subjects and as a means to advance human evolution to shut down, that does not mean that the people behind those organizations disappeared completely. In fact, it seems that instead the few people left who still believed in those programs found one another and created a more secretive organization in the shadows known as Xeno. Xeno was the group behind the assassination of Charles Xavier in the X-Force series, and while Xavier was of course successfully resurrected, Xeno still created quite a shiver of panic among the mutants of Krakoa. A shiver down Krakoa's spine. I don't know if the island has a spine, but if it did. Xeno are ruthless, resourceful, and terrifying in their methods, successfully using the captured Domino skin to ensure their assassination team's success. Yikes. And also ick. I love these ladies so much. They are basically a villainous eco-terrorist version of the Golden Girls group. They are sassy elderly women who used to work for corrupt and greedy biotech companies who did not care about the effects of their work in regards to the planet's well-being. As such, these women decided to fight back. They planted their own seed within all the companies, hoping to infiltrate them over time so that they would then have control of all plant life on Earth, deciding what grows and what does not grow. However, with the Krakoa's miracle plants and miracle medicine hitting the market as a result of the mutant nation being recognized globally, their plans, of course, were threatened. Horticulture formed, and these four women, Opal, Lily, Augusta, and Edith, threatened the mutants of Krakoa. This group is a little lighter when it comes to, I would say, their hatred of mutant kind. Really, they kind of just hate anyone who opposes them and anyone who harms the Earth. That's what they're all about. They're all about just like, we want to make sure that plants are alright. That's their plan. So when they first attacked, it was with a green sticky substance that appeared to neutralize mutant powers, and they actually vowed to either cause Krakoa to join them, or they would basically cut them down like a weed. So they were just basically like, look, we don't have to hate you, but don't be a jerk. Probably one of the worst mutant-hating villains, or perhaps in terms of how much he hates them, one of the best, I guess you could say, in this regard, is Reverend William Stryker. Stryker sees mutants as demons, and due to his own personal beliefs and experiences, he believes it's basically his true divine calling to like eradicate them. He has been a villain of the X-Men, Wolverine, and he's also of course been affiliated with the Weapon X program. Yeah. I really love Brimstone Love. Such a fun, weird villain. Brimstone Love is a seemingly complicated villain in the Earth 616 reality. He initially appeared as an alternate reality villain, appearing first in the 2099 alternate future reality of Earth 928. There he is a sadistic villain who's obsessed with misery and pain, and seems to thoroughly enjoy tormenting mutants specifically, despite also being a mutant himself. In the Earth 616 reality, he created his Theater of Pain in response to the creation of Krakoa, but would later seemingly join the mutants during Fall of X after Orchis attacked at the Hellfire Gala and ended up seizing enough power and control to almost completely eradicate planet Earth of mutants. Kind of strange, but I also haven't read what he did later. I've only read the other stuff in Marauders, and I was like, that's a pretty crazy change of heart, but alright. Moira was at one point powerful enough to have almost successfully wiped out all mutants. If it weren't for Mystique and Destiny, she would have actually succeeded. Even though she claimed during that past life that she only intended to create a cure to offer to those who wanted it, Destiny knew that any cure that was created would essentially become weaponized and forced on mutants regardless of their own wants or their desires. For those who haven't been reading along recently with the events of the current X line of comics, it was of course revealed that Moira herself was actually a mutant whose power was basically reincarnation in her own form. When Moira died in her life, she was basically reborn as herself, but with all the memories of her past life, and then she would relive her whole life again and she could do things differently if she wanted to. As such, Moira wasn't just a dangerous potential villain for the X-Men, but kind of the whole of Earth 616, which actually seems to be tied to Moira's existence in in her 10th life. Pretty crazy stuff. Moira is no longer a mutant after being cured in the 2021 Inferno series when Mystique shot her with a weapon of Forge's design, which of course zaps mutants of their powers. But she still is a dangerous woman with a lot of information. And also, she's completely crazy now. It was heavily implied that the creation of Krakoa was kind of all about eventually ridding the world of mutants over time, with Krakoa being like their last hurrah in terms of Moira's evil plan. Also pretty sneaky evil plan to be like, I'll give them Krakoa, they'll never know, they'll think I'm working with them, and they'll all die out. While the Heroic Marauders team might operate separately from the X-Men, they were initially made up of a lot of former and current X-Men members, including one of the original team members, Bobby Drake. And that initial roster also included Storm as well. Man, that initial roster was OP. This team, led by Captain Kate, ended up going up against the anti-mutant organization Homines Verendi, which is composed of former Inner Circle members of the Hellfire Club. Also, can we just acknowledge how great the Hellfire Trading Company was though? Separate, of course, from Homines Verendi, and we're going to talk about that too, but also, man, Hellfire Trading Club, what a great time. Homines Verendi were previously known as the unofficial Hellfire Brats, and were originally part of the Hellfire Academy. The team also has their own White Queen, their own Black King, and the like, similar to the Krakoa's Quiet Council and of course the former Hellfire Club. Although today we know the Hellfire Club as being a mainly mutant villain group when they are being villainous, which more recently of course evolved into the Hellfire Trading Company during the Krakoan era, becoming somewhat more heroic in their pursuits, or at the very least more neutral, considering that Sebastian Shaw was still heavily involved and of course sometimes up to no good. It might surprise you to learn that when the Hellfire Club started, mutant hate was actually one of the things that was on their agenda. Oh yeah, or at least shortly after they started. Maybe like mutant hate is a bit of a strong word, but I would say it's hate that stems out of, you know, like most people, their fear of mutants. Early on, the club became involved with Donald Pierce, and at one point they were actually attempting to hunt down mutants with their own Sentinels. It wasn't until the seeming death of Sebastian Shaw's fiancée, Lord Chantel, that the mutants who were a part of the Hellfire Club, the few of them, rose up and overthrew the ruling Inner Circle, taking the club for themselves, while later on recruiting other mutants in to influence its ranks. And of course Sebastian Shaw and Emma Frost being a couple of the top dogs in terms of the mutants that we had at that time. Albert Carey made his first appearance in the X-Force 2022 annual. Here he appears as a scientist working for Orchis. In the annual he appeared in, Carey went up against Wolverine, Domino, and Quentin Quire's Kid Omega. Honestly, that would probably be pretty challenging. He planned to do a short burst of tests on the captured mutants after luring them into a trap. He planned on them dying during these tests, but on keeping the data of said tests to learn from. While they stole the motherboard which stored information for the potential devices and stratagems that they were actually testing at that time, Albert Carey, who seemingly ran the tests, was pretty confident that with time they could actually rebuild what they lost, and more vitally, he saw it actually as a win in that they now have more information, which opens up new knowledge and possible future questions and experiments as a result. I feel like we haven't really seen any more of him, but I feel like that was a cool seed that we planted. Will we come back to it? Did we come back to it and I missed it? Let me know. One of the biggest bads in terms of mutant hate groups I would say right now in the comics still has to be Orchis. Orchis was made up of various influential groups, some of them villainous, some not, who were brought together investing their money, their time, and their resources in the pursuit of basically combating and nerfing mutant evolution. Krakoa was such a big deal that it literally united everyone under the umbrella of Orchis to pool their resources and rally against mutant advancements and mutant independence in the future that the island nation had promised. Basically, if you all unite to create a really awesome mutant superpower, your enemies and sometimes your allies will also unite to make sure that that power isn't too powerful or maybe doesn't exist at all.